The first time I realized my neighbor was flooding my yard on purpose, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, holding a cup of coffee I'd already reheated twice, staring out the back window like some retired detective with nothing better to do. And honestly, that's probably exactly what I looked like. Water was pouring out of this white PVC pipe behind my fence in one hard stream. Not dripping, not overflowing naturally, but shooting straight into my lawn like somebody had hooked a fire hose to the side of their house and aimed it directly at me. And the crazy part was, 2 weeks earlier, I probably would have apologized for being annoyed about it. That's the kind of person I used to be. I live in a little neighborhood outside Asheville, North Carolina. The kind of place where people wave from pickup trucks even if they don't know you, where everybody's lawn is basically a personality test. Mine wasn't perfect, but I took care of it. After my divorce, that backyard became my therapy. I built a little cedar planter box with my daughter Lily one summer, strung lights over the patio, planted tomatoes I could never keep squirrels away from. Stupid little things, but they mattered to me. It felt like the first place in years that was fully mine. Then Caleb Mercer moved in behind me. At first, he seemed all right. Mid-40s maybe, always wearing golf polos, drove a black Denali that somehow never had dust on it. He bought the old Whitmore property and immediately started renovating like he was flipping a luxury Airbnb for HGTV. Concrete crews every morning, contractors blasting country music at 7 a.m., giant pallets of stone getting dropped off every other day. The old backyard used to slope naturally toward a wooded drainage ditch behind both our lots, but Caleb flattened everything. New patio, retaining wall, artificial turf in one section. It looked clean, I'll give him that, clean in a way that made the rest of us feel poor. The first heavy storm after the renovation, I noticed a puddle near the back fence. Didn't think much of it. Summer storms around here are brutal sometimes. Rain comes down sideways, gutters overflow. Everybody deals with a little standing water. But the puddle stayed for 2 days. Then 3. The grass underneath turned yellow and soft, like somebody had laid wet cardboard over the roots. The next storm was worse. I remember hearing the rain hammering the windows around midnight, and something woke me up around maybe 2 in the morning. This weird rushing sound. I walked into the kitchen half asleep and looked outside, and there it was. Water blasting out of that white pipe in a solid stream straight into my yard, carving this muddy trench through the grass like a miniature river. I actually laughed at first because it looked so ridiculous. Then I realized my entire backyard was underwater. Meanwhile, Caleb's yard looked pristine. Dry patio furniture. No pooling. No mud. All that water had been rerouted downhill into my property. The next afternoon, I walked over there, trying very hard to be normal about it. Caleb was outside wiping down his grill like he was filming a commercial. I said, "Hey man, I think your drainage pipe's pushing a lot of water into my yard." He barely looked up. "Water flows downhill, buddy." That word buddy. I don't know why, but it irritated the hell out of me. I said, "Yeah, naturally. This isn't exactly natural though." He shrugged. "Contractor said it's up to code." Then he smiled. Not friendly either. More like the kind of smile people give right before they close a door in your face. "You should talk to them if you got concerns." So I did. A few days later, I caught the contractor finishing up near the fence line. Guy named Rick. Sunburned neck, chewing sunflower seeds, looked exhausted by life in general. I explained the flooding, and he gave me this long sigh like he'd already had this conversation before. "Look," he said, "everything on his property meets county requirements. Once runoff leaves his lot, it's considered surface flow." Surface flow. That phrase sat in my head for days. Because technically, sure, rainwater moves. Everybody knows that. But there's a difference between nature and somebody building a damn water cannon aimed at your tomatoes. By the third storm, my backyard smelled like a swamp. Mosquitoes everywhere. Lily stopped wanting to sit outside when she came over because the ground sucked at your shoes every time you stepped near the fence. One afternoon, she looked at the standing water and said, "Dad, are they doing this to us on purpose?" And that question hit me harder than it should have. Because honestly, I think part of me already knew the answer. After Lily asked me that, I started noticing things I probably should have paid attention to sooner. Not just the water, but Caleb himself, the little comments, the timing, the way he carried himself like the neighborhood was slowly becoming an inconvenience he intended to redesign. A week later, I was dragging 2 trash bags to the curb when he walked by and casually said, "Might want to think about regrading your yard." Standing water hurts property value. Then he smiled and kept walking like he was giving financial advice on CNBC. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not rage exactly, quieter than that. The kind of calm where you stop arguing emotionally and start paying attention. So I did. Next storm, I recorded everything from my kitchen window. Water racing off his concrete patio. Gutters overflowing into underground drains. Then that pipe, that stupid white pipe, firing runoff directly through the fence gap and into my yard like a pressure washer. I took videos during daylight, nighttime, close-ups of the pooling water, timestamps, everything. I even stuck little measuring flags in the mud to track how deep it got after storms. My friend Dana, who works for a survey company, came over one Saturday and stood in the backyard with her hands on her hips staring at the fence line. "You know this isn't accidental, right?" she said. I figured. "No," she said, crouching near the mud. "I mean, this was engineered." That word bothered me more than anything. Engineered. Like somebody sat at a table and intentionally solved the problem of rainwater by deciding my property should absorb it instead. Dana helped me pull county drainage regulations online that night. Most of it was dry legal language, but one section stood out immediately. Property owners couldn't concentrate runoff and discharge it directly onto neighboring land in a way that caused damage or nuisance conditions. Diffuse runoff? Fine. Directed discharge? Problem. I read that paragraph maybe 10 times. Now, most people probably would and oppose. VE filed a complaint right there. And maybe I should have. But the truth is, I'd spent years in conflict already. Divorce lawyers, custody schedules, arguing over retirement accounts, and who got what furniture. I was tired of official battles. Tired of sitting in rooms while strangers decided what counted as fair. Plus, I knew something about guys like Caleb. People like that only respect consequences they can physically see. So instead of calling the county, I called a landscaper. His name was Ernesto, older Cuban guy with permanently dirt-stained boots and the energy of somebody who'd seen every bad homeowner decision imaginable. I explained the flooding situation while he smoked half a cigarette and stared toward Caleb's patio. Finally, he said, "You want legal solution or satisfying solution?" I laughed harder than I had in weeks. "What's the difference?" "Legal solution takes paperwork," he said. "Satisfying solution takes shovel." Now, before anybody gets carried away, I didn't want to damage anything. I wasn't trying to flood Caleb's house or destroy property. Honestly, if I had gone that route, I'd probably be the villain of this story. What I wanted was simpler than revenge. I wanted the water to stop living in my yard. Ernesto walked the fence line for nearly 20 minutes checking slope with this little yellow level tool while I followed him around like an intern. Finally, he stopped near the back corner where both properties dipped slightly downhill. He muttered. That, sounded expensive. He pointed toward the fence. Your yard naturally sheds toward that corner. But his retaining wall changed the flow. Water hits here now and gets trapped. So what do? He grinned. We remind water where it wanted to go originally. A week later, his crew showed up. To anybody driving by, it looked like normal landscaping work. We built a raised flower bed along the back fence with stacked stone edging, black mulch, ornamental grasses, lavender, a couple hardy shrubs. Nice looking, tasteful, suburban Pinterest stuff. But hidden behind all that pretty landscaping was a compacted soil berm reinforced with gravel underneath. Not huge, maybe 14 inches high at the center. Just enough to interrupt the stream coming from Caleb's pipe and redirect it sideways along the natural grade. Ernesto called it passive correction. I called it art. The first storm after we finished, I sat in the kitchen again with Lily eating microwave popcorn like we were waiting for a movie to start. Rain started slow at first, tapping the windows gently. Then the sky opened up. And right on schedule, here came Caleb's drainage cannon. Water blasted through the pipe, hit the berm dead on, spread sideways instead of forward, then began creeping along the fence exactly the way Ernesto predicted. Slow, controlled, natural looking. Lily leaned forward. Is it going back? Sort of, I said. The beautiful part was, nothing dramatic happened. No giant flood, no destruction. The water simply followed the lowest available path, which now curved gently toward Caleb's unfinished side yard where his contractors had never installed proper drainage. By morning, my lawn looked better than it had in months. His side yard looked like a wet sponge cake. 2 storms later, the mosquitoes migrated. 3 storms later, I noticed Caleb standing in his yard wearing loafers that were absolutely not designed for mud. He kept trying to step around puddles while talking angrily on his phone. At one point, he looked over toward my fence and just stared. I waved. He didn't wave back. Then came the knock. Saturday morning around 9. Sharp knocks too, not neighborly knocks. The kind people use when they've rehearsed an argument in the car beforehand. I opened the door holding a coffee mug, and there stood Caleb in khakis splattered with mud halfway to his knees. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Did you change something back there?" I took a sip of coffee first. Not even intentionally dramatic. I was genuinely drinking coffee, but I'll admit afterward it felt cinematic as hell. I improved the landscaping. His jaw tightened. Well, now my side yard's holding water. I nodded slowly like this was new information. Huh. You redirected it. No, I said calmly. I protected my property from concentrated runoff. That line landed exactly how I hoped it would. Because suddenly he realized I understood the rules now too. He stepped closer. You trying to make some kind of point? And this is where old me would have backed down. Old me hated confrontation. But standing there looking at mud splattered up his expensive pants while my backyard finally sat dry for the first time in months, I realized something. Bullies really do count on your discomfort more than your weakness. So I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, Caleb. I'm just letting gravity make its own decisions." He stared at me for a long second after that. Angry, embarrassed, probably trying to figure out whether I was threatening him or mocking him. Truthfully, it was a little of both. For about a week after that conversation, things got strangely quiet. No knock on the door, no passive-aggressive comments. No contractors marching around Caleb's backyard like they were preparing for battle. Just rain and mud. And this weird tension hanging over the fence between our houses like both of us were waiting to see who blinked first. Then the neighborhood gossip machine kicked in. Now every subdivision has one person who somehow knows everything before it officially happens. In ours, that person was Denise Holloway. Retired dental hygienist, drove a golf cart like she was patrolling international waters. 3 days after Caleb showed up at my door, Denise slowed down in front of my mailbox and said, "Heard there's a drainage dispute brewing behind the Mercer place." I almost choked laughing. A drainage dispute. Made it sound like 2 European countries were about to invade each other over a river. But apparently Caleb had started complaining to people that I'd altered watershed behavior between the lots, which is an incredibly fancy way of saying, my neighbor stopped letting me dump water into his yard. That's when I realized something important. He genuinely thought he was the victim. And honestly, that fascinated me. Because somewhere inside Caleb's brain, he'd convinced himself that protecting his property was responsible, while protecting mine was hostile. Some people really do believe inconvenience becomes injustice the second it affects them personally. The next storm settled everything. It came through late on a Thursday night. One of those Carolina storms where the sky turns green for a while beforehand and everybody suddenly remembers they left something outside. Around midnight, thunder shook the windows hard enough to wake me up. I walked into the kitchen and looked out back expecting the usual river show. Except this time, there were work lights glowing in Caleb's yard. At first I thought maybe another landscaping crew had arrived, but then I saw Caleb himself standing ankle-deep in mud wearing a rain jacket over pajama pants, wrestling with this giant black corrugated drainage tube like a man fighting an anaconda. And I swear to God, he was trying to manually redirect the water around the berm. I stood there watching this full-grown man in the pouring rain trying to outsmart gravity at 1 a.m, and suddenly the whole situation became absurdly funny to me. Months earlier, this thing had stressed me out so badly I couldn't enjoy sitting in my own backyard. Now I was eating leftover cheesecake straight from the fridge while watching karma perform live theater outside my window. Then came the part Caleb definitely didn't think through. The temporary tube slipped. Water shot sideways, blasted directly against his unfinished retaining wall, and within seconds one section collapsed into the mud with this deep crunching sound that I actually felt through the kitchen floor. Caleb just stood there frozen. Rain pouring down. Mud everywhere. Part of the wall leaning sideways like a drunk uncle at a barbecue. I should have felt victorious. Maybe a little part of me did. But mostly I just felt tired. Because at the end of the day, this whole stupid war existed because one guy couldn't accept the idea that solving his problem by creating someone else's problem wasn't actually solving anything. The county inspector showed up the following Monday. Apparently, one of Caleb's contractors reported the wall collapse during permit discussions, which triggered a drainage review for both properties. Funny how fast rules matter once insurance companies get nervous. Inspector's name was Marianne Cole. Mid-60s maybe, sharp eyes, carried herself like somebody impossible to intimidate. She walked both yards slowly while Caleb followed behind her, talking nonstop. The water patterns changed after he built that berm. He redirected natural flow. He intentionally altered drainage conditions. Marian held up one hand without even looking at him. "Sir, I'll ask questions when I need clarification." That shut him up immediately. Then she came over to my side and asked if I had documentation. I handed her a folder almost 2 inches thick. Photos, videos, dates, measurements, copies of county code sections, even screenshots showing how the discharge pipe originally aimed directly into my lawn. She flipped through everything quietly for a minute, then looked over at Caleb's pipe. "You installed concentrated discharge without retention mitigation." Caleb blinked. "My contractor said it was compliant." "Your contractor was wrong." Just like that. No dramatic speech. No courtroom moment. Just one exhausted county employee ending 6 months of nonsense in a single sentence. Marianne explained that my berm and landscaping were legal because they remained entirely on my property and merely restored natural sheet flow. His pipe system, however, unlawfully concentrated runoff toward a neighboring lot without proper absorption infrastructure. Then came the best part. She handed Caleb a compliance notice requiring corrective drainage installation within 30 days. I'm not proud of this, but I almost smiled. Almost. Within 2 weeks, a new crew arrived. Different company this time. No loud music. No giant egos. They dug a proper underground dry well system with gravel trenches and a soakaway basin designed to absorb runoff gradually into his own soil. Exactly what should have been installed from the beginning. And after that, everything changed. Not dramatically, quietly. The next storm came and went. My backyard drained normally for the first time in nearly a year. The grass slowly recovered. Lily started hanging lights back up around the patio again. One evening we sat outside eating burgers while cicadas buzzed in the trees, and she looked around and said, "It feels peaceful again." That one sentence meant more to me than winning ever did. As for Caleb, we still live behind each other. We wave sometimes now. Weirdly enough. Not friendly exactly, but civil. Like 2 countries after a ceasefire. Though every once in a while after heavy rain, I'll catch him standing near that corner of the yard inspecting the drainage grate like he's checking on an old enemy. And honestly, maybe I do the same thing from my side too. Because here's the part people keep arguing about whenever I tell this story. Some folks think I should have reported him immediately instead of playing the long game. Others think the berm was petty and passive-aggressive. Maybe they're right. Maybe there was a more mature way to handle all of it. But I'll say this. The moment somebody decides their comfort matters more than your peace, the relationship changes whether you want it to or not. I never flooded his yard. I never damaged his property. I just stopped volunteering mine. So tell me honestly, what would you have done in my position? Would you have called the county immediately, or would you have handled it the same way I did? And more importantly, at what point does protecting yourself start looking like revenge to everyone else? If you enjoyed the story, hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments because I guarantee people are going to be divided on this one.